Good morning and welcome to our June Sustainability webinar. Now, in this webinar, we are continuing our journey through AASBS 2. Today, looking at Pillar 3, streamlining climate risk policies. So, we're looking at Pillar 3, the risk management pillar. As always, I'm Alera Boshoff. I'll be presenting this webinar this month, and you've got my contact details if you would like to reach out to me. I should say that I'm actually presenting this webinar from Europe, from Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and there's a sustainability story associated with it. We've been on one of these canal cruises in the original or the old part of Amsterdam, and the tour guide quite casually mentioned that if you want to travel on any of the canals in Amsterdam, you're not allowed to do that if you burn fossil fuels. So they've got legislation in place that only electric boats are allowed on these canals. Another interesting sustainability fact, as we've been walking around in Amsterdam, you see a lot of people walking. I would say 90% of the people are on bicycles. Public transport, fantastic. Trams, electric trams. Trains, fantastic. Electric trains. You hardly see cars. And if you see cars, again, you see electric cars quite a lot. And if you park on the street, you can even charge your car on the street. So a number of sustainability observations while I'm here in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. We are here on a family holiday, so I'm here with my husband and 4 kids. But interesting how sustainability has become quite normal in Europe. Huge push to electrification, and you can see it all around us. A really beautiful city, amazing to see people walking, cycling, fantastic. So a bit of my journey. Now, BDO acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. And we pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Now, as you know, we've got these monthly sustainability webinars. We're working through AASBS 2 as our very first clients will be reporting 31 December 2025. This month, we're looking at Pillar 3. We continue looking at Pillar 3 next month in July. And then we move over to Pillar 4. Now, Pillar 4 will take 3 months. We look at carbon accounting. We look at setting targets, tracking against your targets, and also where the carbon credits will be used. So quite a number of interesting webinars coming up. Now, we also have our IFRS and corporate reporting monthly webinars. And just last week, Kevin Frobers and I discussed accounting for climate and other uncertainties in financial statements. Now, if you've missed that webinar, please, I would highly recommend that you look at that webinar. We were trying to bring together the information included in AASBS 2 with information that will be reported under your normal financial statement. So I highly recommend that one. Then also we continue with our quarterly carbon accounting masterclasses. We had one in June, next one scheduled for the 3rd of September, and also another one scheduled for the 3rd of December. I did receive some feedback that, Aletta, it's not a good time to schedule a carbon accounting masterclass in the first week of the month because accountants are very busy in that particular week. My apologies for that. Therefore, for a next calendar year, 2026, we'll be scheduling these carbon accounting masterclasses again quarterly, but for the second week of the month. And we've been looking at February, May, September, and November to schedule those for next year. Then the big news this month. Last week, we've launched our AASB S2 climate-related disclosures checklist. And the idea is to help our clients and other contacts, other webinar attendees, to use this checklist to assess their readiness. So, apologies, it's readiness across governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. So identify gaps, align with AASB 2, and make sure that you've got audit-ready disclosures. So at the bottom of the slide, you can download the checklist. Now, I've included a few extracts to give you a flavor. So we start by providing an overview of the 4 pillars: governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. And then we also have a 5th pillar, and that's the general requirements from AASB 1 that's been carried forward to AASB 2 on a mandatory basis. It's included in an appendix. So if you add up all these disclosures, and we've had the totals at the bottom, if you add them all up across the 4 pillars and the general requirements that are mandatorily included, 149 disclosures. And we include all these disclosures across 5 tables, and it's easy to navigate. Pillar 1 would be governance disclosures, everything will be red. The blue pillar, the blue disclosures strategy, the yellow risk management, the green metrics and targets, and the grey pillar, the general requirements. Then we've also included a rating scale. So we've included in every table an assessment column. And in that assessment column, you can look at the disclosure requirement and assess where you're on the journey. So it could be that you are compliant. So you provide information that substantively meets the material elements of the requirement. It could be that there's a partial gap, so some uplift required. So some of the information is there. You might need a bit more. Maybe there's insufficient detail. Then the third one is a gap. There's a significant uplift required. Maybe there are no details already included, and they're not rated. Maybe it's not rated because the requirement is not relevant in the particular year. For example, scope 3 is not relevant in the first year, or maybe that requirement is not relevant to your business. So that's the rating scale that we suggest. So how does it look like in the actual questionnaire or in the checklist? This is an extract from the risk management pillar, the yellow pillar, because that's what we'll be discussing today. And you'll see there's a number, there's the disclosure requirement. Sometimes we include in italics some examples to assist. Then we have a reference to AASB 2, so you can see exactly where it comes from. And then the final column, the assessment column, you can tick it's compliant, it's a partial gap, it's a gap, or not rated. And that's included throughout the checklist for ease of use. And then at the end, we have a summary table where you can include for each and every pillar, how many of the disclosures were you compliant, there's a partial gap, a gap, or not rated. And then on the right-hand side, you can have your total compliant disclosures as a number out of the total disclosures. You can also add up the different pillars or columns to see how many compliant disclosures, how many partial gaps across all the pillars, etc. So a nice summary after you've worked through the disclosure checklist. Now, we really hope you find this disclosure checklist useful. We've tried to make it easy to navigate. There's some tabs on the right-hand side that you can go from the one pillar to the next easily. As you can see, a summary page. And obviously, if you're looking for any assistance to improve the partial gaps or the total gaps, please reach out to BDO and we would love to help you. So back to today's webinar. Now today we're looking at the risk management pillar, pillar 3, but let's start and take a step back and look at an overview of AASB 2. Now, the objective of AASB 2 is to require an entity to disclose information about its climate-related risks and opportunities that is useful to primary users, and those users are investors, or financiers. So those could be current or future investors or financiers. And it's to help them to make decisions in relating to providing resources to the entity to invest in the entity or to provide financing. Very important, it's all about climate-related risk and opportunities, and therefore very important for businesses to conduct a climate risk and opportunity assessment, document that whole process and assessment to have audit-ready information. Then AASB 2 requires an entity to disclose information about climate-related risk and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect the entity's cash flows, its access to finance, or cost of capital, and it is over the short, medium, and long term. So we have to look at cash flows, access to finance, cost of capital over 3 terms, short, medium, and long term. If we look at the scope of AASB 2, remember AASB 2 applies to risks to which the entity is exposed. Those could be physical risks or it could be transition risks. And then also AASB 2 applies to climate-related opportunities that are available to the entity. And then the last bullet point on this slide, climate-related risk and opportunities that could not reasonably be expected to affect the entity's prospects are outside the scope of AASB 2. So it's very interesting, when you do a climate risk and opportunity assessment, we usually start with a long list of risks and opportunities, and then we work through which of those could reasonably be expected to affect the entity's prospects, and we include those risks and opportunities in our disclosures within AASB 2. So it's a process we have to go through, and you have to show the auditor how you've gone through that particular process. Now, we always look at this diagram. It's from the TCFD. I love this diagram because it so nicely pulls together transition risk, physical risks, and on the other side, opportunities, how these risks and opportunities flow through to the strategy of the business. So that was pillar 2, but also impacts the risk management activities of the business, pillar 3, which we're talking about today, and then ultimately flows through to the financial impact on the financial statements. Now, earlier I've said that last week, Kevin Frobers and I, during the IFRS and corporate reporting webinar, talked about the financial impact. So we looked in particular how everything in AASB 2, all these risks and opportunities, ultimately flow through to a financial impact in the accompanying financial statements. But obviously we also look at scenario analysis and the financial impact in scenario analysis. So if we look at that TCFD recommendations, they also had the 4 pillars. The 3rd pillar, looking at risk management, disclosed how the company identify, assess, and manage climate-related risks. And the 3 high-level disclosures which were included within the TCFD recommendations were: describe the company's processes for identifying and assessing climate-related risks. Secondly, describe the company's processes for managing climate-related risks. And finally, describe how processes for identifying, assessing, and managing climate-related risk are integrated into the company's overall risk management. Just maybe pause here. A lot of people would say to us, we've complied with the TCFD recommendations in the past. Surely we are very close to compliance with AASB 2. Please note the TCFD recommendations consist of 11 fairly high-level recommendations. Now, as I've shown earlier, in our AASB 2 checklist, we articulate that AASB 2 consists of 149 very specific and detailed disclosures. So complying with these TCFD recommendations is a great stepping stone, but usually there's still significant uplift required to get to AASB 2 compliant disclosures. So if you look at AASB 2, again, the same 4 pillars. If you look at the risk management pillar, here they have a whole section on processes and related policies that the entity uses to identify, assess, prioritize, and monitor climate-related risks. There's climate-related scenario analysis. And finally, how do you integrate your risk management around climate-related risks and opportunities into your overall risk management process and risk register? Critically important that everything around climate risk and opportunities are embedded in the broader risk register and the broader risk management processes of the business. If it exists separately, really hard to embed, to execute, to remember about. So always better to embed in your risk management process. The TCFD have run a number of workshops over the years, and in one particular workshop, they've looked at the importance of risk management. So why do we have this whole pillar around risk management? And these are some of the items that they've discussed in that webinar or that workshop. And there's a link to that workshop as well, just below the heading. They found that disclosing risk management processes provides important context for investors and other users of the disclosures. And investors and other users of climate-related financial disclosures are interested in understanding how a company's risks are identified, assessed, managed, and whether those processes are indeed integrated into existing risk management processes, because they know if it's integrated into existing processes, the chance of success is so much higher. And therefore, important to look at these risk management disclosures. The TCFD also conducted a survey to understand the most useful climate-related information for making financial decisions, and users who completed that survey identified the following types of risk management information as the most useful. First of all, a description of whether the company considers existing and emerging regulatory requirements related to climate change as part of their risk assessment processes. Now, when we do risk management, we know, or a risk assessment for clients, one of the transition risks that we look at are existing and emerging regulatory requirements. So they would like to know whether that is done. Secondly, what are the processes for identifying and assessing climate-related risks? How would the company prioritize climate-related risks? And then also, second last bullet point, how the entity makes decisions to mitigate, transfer, accept, or control those risks. And finally, how the company's processes for identifying, assessing, and managing climate-related risk are integrated into the company's overall risk management framework. So that's a bit of a theme already embedded in your overall risk management framework. So if we have a look at Pillar 3, the risk management disclosures, in the objective paragraph, AASB 2 outlines the objective of these climate-related financial disclosures on risk management is to enable users of general purpose financial reports to understand an entity's processes, to identify, to assess, to prioritize, and monitor climate-related risk and opportunities, and also to enable the users to understand whether and how those processes are integrated into the entity's overall risk management process. So that's the objective. Let's look at the detailed disclosure requirements. Now, in our AASB 2 checklist, you'll see that there are 9 disclosure requirements specifically related to risk management. Only 9. and they're on this one slide. You'll see here that, first of all, a disclosure requirement around has the entity disclose information about processes and related policies that it used to identify, assess, prioritize, and monitor climate-related risk. Then in the second one, has the entity disclosed information about the inputs and the parameters that it uses? So it's information about data sources and the scope of operations that's covered in these processes. In the third one, has the entity disclosed information about whether and how it uses climate-related scenario analysis to inform its identification of climate-related risks? Now, it's interesting, in paragraph 22 of AASBS 2, they specifically mandate the use of scenario analysis. Now, that's somewhat interesting. AASBS 2 is a disclosure standard. However, in paragraph 22, the entity shall use scenario analysis. So there's also a mandate, a requirement that mandates scenario analysis, and then you have to disclose whether you've used it, how you've used it. If you look at disclosure requirement number 4, has the entity disclosed information about how it assesses the nature, the likelihood, and magnitude of the effects of those risks? So it's important. When we look at our risk assessment, we come up with the nature of the risk, the inherent risk without considering controls, and then we have to consider the likelihood of that happening and the magnitude if it was to happen. Right, so really important to have a look at that. In number 5, has the entity disclosed information about whether and how it prioritizes climate-related risk relative to other types of risk? Again, incredibly important. If an organization, as an example, have 20 business risks before they consider climate-related risks, one would not expect there to be another 20 climate-related risks. So 20 normal business risk and another 20 climate-related risks. How did the entity prioritize which of the climate-related risks should be added to the overall risk register? Should we add 3, 4, 5? Should we combine some of them? Should we amend existing risks to incorporate climate-related risks? But some degree of proportionality, that's what's asked in disclosure number 5. Then also in number 6, has the entity disclosed information about how it monitors climate-related risks? Number 7, has the entity disclosed information about whether and how it has changed the processes it uses compared with previous reporting periods? And in number 8, has the entity disclosed information about the processes it uses to identify, assess, prioritize, and monitor climate-related opportunities? So the first 7 are all about risks, and now we look at opportunities, including information about whether and how it uses climate-related scenario analysis to inform its identification of climate-related opportunities. So scenario analysis is not just about risks, it also is scenario analysis around the opportunities. And in number 9, has the entity disclosed information about the extent to which and how the processes for identifying, assessing, prioritizing, and monitoring climate-related risks and opportunities are integrated into and inform the entity's overall risk management processes? Now, I like to look at the disclosure requirements upfront before we delve into the detail, because in the end, we are doing all our projects, running all our projects in order to generate the data that meet these disclosure requirements. So if we look at risk management, what do we have to do in order to generate the information, the systems, the policies, the processes that we can meet these disclosure requirements? So, good to start with the actual disclosure requirements. Then if we look at the TCFD guidance, now, as I said earlier, for many parts of AASBS 2, the International Sustainability Standards Board have not developed and issued their own guidance. They rely heavily on previous guidance issued by the TCFD. The TCFD have issued amazing guidance over the years. Now, if we look at risk management, there's a link to the document. The TCFD issued guidance on risk management, integration, and disclosure. And I would like to touch on some of the aspects in this publication in today's webinar. First of all, they start by articulating that incorporating climate change risks into the existing risk management framework is likely to be the best way to ensure the impact of climate change is properly considered in decision making. So this is one of the key statements that they make really early on in the publication. Then they also include a section where they consider the unique characteristics of climate-related risks. So a lot of risk management professionals are used to financial risks and putting processes and policies in around financial risks. Therefore, they thought, let's just articulate why climate-related risks are so unique and what are some of the things we should consider. Now, in this publication, they look at some possible implications of different temperature increases. We know that we've got more relevant, more accurate, more up-to-date information in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Report 6. But this was just an idea to illustrate, or an attempt to illustrate, how climate-related risks are unique. So, for example, they've looked at 3 different temperature increases by the end of the century. So less than 2 degrees, 3 degrees, and 5 degrees. And then they've discussed some physical impacts, and it's just to illustrate. So, for example, if you look at sea level rises at 5 degrees, much higher than at less than 2 degrees, they look at the chance of ice-free Arctic summers. So at less than 2 degrees, the chance, so in particular 1.5 degrees, the chance is 1 in 30. At 2 degrees, it's 1 in 6. At 3 degrees, it's 4 in 6. And in 5 degrees, an ice-free Arctic summer, the chance are 6 in 6, 100%. They've also looked at frequency of extreme rainfall. And you can see frequency of extreme rainfall again potentially increases by 5 degrees. Increases in wildfire extent. Again, you can see much worse around the 5 degrees. People facing extreme heat waves, again, are 300 times more likely at 5 degrees. And then land area hospitable to malaria. Coming from South Africa, I understand the danger of malaria very well. And you can see at 5 degrees, again, a 46% increase. So those are physical impacts, physical type climate risks. They look at economic impacts. So looking at the financial impacts, but also flagging there for some of the transition risks. The global GDP impact, the stranded assets, the food supply impact. So all of these, some significant economic impacts over the different degrees. So climate-related risks are unique, and we have to think quite differently about them, think outside the box around physical impacts and economic impacts. Then they've also included a table where they look at the characteristics of climate-related risk. So all of this is about educating businesses, finance teams, users, risk management professionals about the unique characteristics of climate-related risk that we now have to deal with. So first of all, There are the effects of climate change and climate-related risk occur on local, regional, and global scales with different implications. So depending on your geography, there could be different implications. You know that in the IPCC number 6 report, they break the world down into different regions and consider the impacts, but they also take Australia, which is such a big continent, into different regions. Also, in the second one, there are longer time horizons and long-lived effects. So some climate-related risks exist and play out over time horizons that stretch beyond traditional business planning and investment cycles. So if we look at those time periods, short term, aligned with your budget cycle, medium term, usually aligned with your strategic or investment cycle, and long term, open-ended, even longer than that, because often climate-related risks only eventuate over the longer term. Then there's also a novel and uncertain nature around climate-related risks. Climate change is a dynamic and uncertain phenomenon, and possible mitigation responses are also complex, and there are many unknowns around climate change and mitigation activities. The second last one, the changing magnitude and non-linear dynamics around climate change. Climate systems may exhibit thresholds and tipping points that result in large, long-term, abrupt, and possibly irreversible changes. Understanding the sensitivities of tipping points in the physical climate system, as well as in ecosystems and society, is essential for understanding climate-related risks. And then the last one that they've articulated, complex relationships and systemic effects. So risks associated with climate change are interconnected across socioeconomic and financial systems. And such interconnected risks are often characterized by knock-on effects and systemic effects. And it would require multidimensional perspectives to assess the short, medium, and long-term implications for a company. So you can see climate-related risk, unique characteristics that make it really hard to identify, to manage over the short, medium, and long term. The other thing that we've talked about a lot already, and which is one of the key aspects in this publication, is the integration of climate-related risk and opportunities in the normal risk management processes of the business. And here they've provided a figure with a bit of an overview of common risk management processes and key elements. So they said the wraparound, we start with governance and strategy setting elements. So that could be board oversight, it could be risk appetite that have to be set at a governance level, operating structures set at a governance level, roles and responsibilities, all of those things are set at a governance level. Then when we move down to the risk management process, the normal risk management process, identify the risk, then assess and prioritize the risk, and then implement a risk response. So assess risks to understand the severity of the effects on the business objectives, and prioritize risks to inform decision-making on risk responses. And then at the bottom, they've got the elements supporting risk management processes, the things to think about: your risk taxonomy, your risk approaches, your risk criteria, and your risk tools that you use within your business. I thought I should include an extract of a risk register or sample risk register to give you an idea of what our expectation would be around a climate risk register. And this will obviously be embedded in your overall risk register. Here we've included You've got your reference, you've got your risk name, you've got a description and the cause for the risk, and then you've got your categories. Now, we've included here acute physical risk, chronic physical risk, policy and legal, transition risk, technology, which is a transition risk, market or customer risk, again, a transition risk, reputation risk, which is a transition risk. And we've then also included some examples of potential opportunities around resources, products, services, etc. It could be that you want to include opportunities within your risk register. Maybe you want to put it completely separate and just keep risk in here. But resources could be a risk, products and services could be a risk, market, capital and assets could be a risk as well. We often say that when you look at the risk and the opportunities in the TCFD framework, they're often the flip side of the coin. Then we also include in the blue a risk owner. The next three columns are looking at an inherent risk rating. So we start with inherent risks, ignoring controls completely. Inherently, what's the likelihood of this risk happening? And then what's the consequence of this, or the magnitude of this risk eventuating? And that will give you a rating, an overall rating. Then if you go to the two blue columns, now we look at the control environment. What are the existing controls that the business already have in place around climate-related risks? And then also an existing control rating. And then finally, if you take your inherent risks and then you consider your controls that's already in place, you end up with your residual risk. So the residual risk after considering controls. If you've got a residual risk rating and it's still too high or unacceptable based on your risk appetite or the risk appetite set by the board, you come up with an action plan, which could be additional controls. So that's just the thinking. Inherent risk, controls, residual risk. Do we have to do more and come up with an action plan? Some ideas, there are a lot of different ways to look at inherent risk rating. This is just an example of an inherent risk rating where likelihood, we've rated 1 to 5, and consequence 1 to 5. And there you can see the combination of likelihood and consequence could get you to a high risk rating or a medium risk rating, or a low risk rating. So a number of options. If you want to look at likelihood, how do we consider likelihood? How can we describe it? A lot of businesses have quite extensive descriptions of likelihood. These are very brief. Remember, this is inherent risk. So we're looking at the likelihood at an inherent risk level, therefore, without taking existing controls into account. So maybe number one is rare. The likelihood is rare. And how do we define rare? It may occur only in exceptional circumstances, as opposed to 5, which is almost certain. It is expected to occur at some time. If you look at consequences, again, you can have it number 1 to 5. Number 1, the consequence is insignificant. No regulatory impact, no client or staff impact, no financial loss, no impact on targets, as an example. These are just examples where level 5 could be extreme. High regulatory impact, high client impact or customer impact, financial loss in excess of a particular number, in this example, $5 million, major effect on operations and ongoing viability, greater than 10% impact on targets, adverse media attention, continuation of business jeopardized. So you can come up with descriptions fit for purpose for your business around likelihood and consequence, but really important to have this and to be able to make it available. If you look at inherent risk rating, These are some more examples of what you could use around prioritization criteria. You could have low is a financial loss than a certain percentage of less than a certain percentage of EBITDA or share price. Low could be a local reputation damage. It could be individual feedback from employees on low staff morale, so it's individual. And low could also be customer complaints from less than a certain percentage of strategic customers. As you go up the scale, let's look at high. Maybe financial loss is now a certain percentage of EBITDA or share price. If you look at reputation damage from media coverage, it persists for 1 to 6 months and results in a certain percentage of non-recurring revenue loss. It could be results from employee surveys showing staff morale is more than a certain percentage less than peer organizations. And there could be threatened or actual loss of a certain percentage of strategic customers. So there's different examples on how you can frame the prioritization or your likelihood and your magnitude of inherent risks. Just a few examples. When you get to your control environment, now you can again, here we've got 4 levels. Level 1 is poor, ad hoc and poorly documented processes or no controls at all. That's the number 1. An excellent could be system is effective in reducing risk. Responsibility is clear, well documented, regularly reviewed. So again, examples on how you can rate your control environment. And then finally, considering inherent risk, considering the control environment, you come up with residual risk. So low residual risk, risk of little concern and or effective controls in place. Medium, controls in place but require regular review. Significant, review of existing controls required. High, immediate action required with ongoing active management. So we've rated our inherent risk, we've considered our controls, we've rated our controls, and now we end up with the residual risk, which would indicate whether we need to take action. So very important when you look at integration in practice, they've also included some key principles for integration. So first of all, talking about interconnections. Integrating climate-related risks into existing risk management requires analysis and collaboration across the company. If you look at temporal orientation, climate-related physical and transition risks should be analyzed across short, medium, and long-term timeframes for operational and strategic planning. And it might mean that you have to look further than your traditional planning horizons. Proportionality, extremely important, and I've mentioned it earlier today as well. Proportionality means the integration of climate-related risks into your existing risk management processes, but it should be proportionate in the context of the company's other risks. So if your other risks, if you've got 20 other risks, we would not expect 20 climate risk on top of that. That wouldn't be proportional unless climate risk is the most significant risk faced by your business. So we'll look at the other risk, we'll look at materiality, and we'll look at the implications on the strategy. And then finally, some key principles for integration: consistency. The methodology used to integrate climate-related risk should be used consistently within the company's risk management processes to support clarity on analysis of developments and drivers of change over time. They've also included some examples of considerations related to integration. Comes back to that earlier diagram where we've started with governance and culture. So what are the board and management support? What training is required? Who are responsible for risk management? What are the climate-related incentives that's in place, and which subcommittees are accountable? So again, governance, incredibly important. Then we go on to risk identification and assessment. So for example, here we look at climate-related risk. In risk inventory, we look at approaches that are updated for climate issues. We look at prioritization criteria. We're looking at materiality assessment of climate drivers, and we look at integration into policies and procedures. Then we move over to strategy and risk appetite. So how do we incorporate climate-related risk into the risk appetite of the business? Do we use climate-related scenario analysis? How do we include the outcome from climate-related scenario analysis into strategic decision-making? How do we implement the various risk tolerances, and how do we manage breaches? And then finally, we get to tools and reporting. Now, reporting is now AASB S2, but there could be other tools available. So what's the adequacy of the tools you have in place? How do you include climate risk assessment in your internal risk reporting? How adequate are your data and metrics? What are the limitations of the data and tools? And what are the limitations around managing the data? And then also, finally, what are the climate-related risk disclosures? So these are all the things that we have to think about as we integrate climate-related risk and opportunities in broader risk management systems. Now, the next few slides looks at transition risks. And it's looking at identification and assessment approaches. And I found this table really useful. We start here with policy and legal risk, which is a transition risk. And they explain some of the characteristics firstly, and they say there's differences in local, regional, and global requirements, and we see that, and incentives. We know there are novel and uncertain effects of policy and legal across jurisdictions. In our Australian jurisdiction, AASB S2 mandatory. A bit of a pause for many organizations in Europe and the US on a very different path. And we also have another characteristics, complex relationships. Connecting the different regulatory developments across different actors and departments. So, for example, if you're an Australian business, but you're a subsidiary of a European business, in Australia, you have to comply with AASB S2, but a part of that complex relationship in Europe, you might have to comply with CSRD or European Sustainability Reporting Standards. So it's not a one-size-fits-all at the moment. Then if we look at the approaches, we have to track the regulatory developments in order to manage the risk. We have to assess the impact of the regulation across operations, supply chain jurisdictions. There are also cross-functional, multidisciplinary collaboration to identify risks and implications. And we need scenario analysis that's focused on policy, environment, sequence, timing, and relationships. And then the bit that I found really interesting, which is different to what we've seen in other documents prepared by the TCFD, are possible metrics, the last column. So maybe we could look at financial impact of carbon pricing and emissions training on our business. Maybe we could look at asset write-off, asset impairment, and retirement costs. Maybe we should look at the number of nodes of influence connecting key policy developments. Maybe we should consider number of relevant policy measures and development timelines. We should consider number of lawsuits brought forward. So these metrics are things we should monitor. And if we see a spike in these metrics, we should potentially reconsider whether this is a climate-related risk and opportunity that we should monitor more closely. So what to look out for as part of ongoing risk management? In this one, we're looking at technology. Again, the characteristics are explained. Again, approaches are explained. So technology assessment and forecasting, maturity and readiness of technology, cost-benefit analysis associated with key technologies, analysis of organizational skills, knowledge, and capabilities associated with key technologies, mapping of dependencies, scenario analysis. Those are the approaches for risk management to identify and assess these risks. But again, the interesting one, what about possible metrics to keep an eye out on? Cost of supply, rate of return, return on investment, and payback periods for different technologies. Product development, effectiveness, and cost. Let's keep an eye out on that. Time to market and research and development success rate, capabilities across peers, number of and effectiveness of collaborative research relationships, and number of patents. All of those, if there's a spike or a change, it could mean that we should identify technology as a risk and maybe reconsider. A next transition risk is around market. And here again, approaches, risk management approaches, analysis of trends in supply and demand for products and services, comparison of the company's position and strategy to competition, engagement with customers and suppliers, identification of merger and acquisition targets, and again, the last column, possible metrics, market size, growth potential, commodity product and service pricing, market coverage, share index, opportunity and threat index, a product portfolio index, revenue mix and sources. Again, a number of metrics to monitor that could potentially indicate that we should consider market as a transition risk. And then if we look at reputation, again, approaches the use of social media, customer feedback, and market research to track customer sentiment and changing preferences, evaluation of employee engagement and satisfaction, identification of relationships between events and news and business and financial impacts. So those are a number of risk identification and assessment approaches. Some key metrics, a share price change, competitors' market positions could change, a change in employee satisfaction levels, a change in customer loyalty and retention levels, your net promoter score, changes in customer satisfaction, media and social media sentiment, number of new customers, independent rankings and ratings. So I think these 4 slides in table D2 of the TCFD document outline some interesting possible metrics to consider that might flag that there's now an increased risk in certain areas. They've also prepared another table, table D3, which is focusing on physical risks and the approaches to monitor and look out for physical risks. So if you look at acute risks, acute physical risks, possible metrics, number of locations, facilities, business lines, etc., exposed or affected, duration of an event, projected or identified loss or damage to a business, facility, supply chain, projected or identified cost of business interruption or repairs, projected or identified impact on sales and customer behavior, insurance cost. And I'm thinking of the recent cyclone we had in Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast, the Gold Coast. If you think about what's the change in insurance cost in that area, what was the duration of the event, in that area? What was the loss or damage that a business suffered during that period and afterwards? Again, that gives you an idea if this is a real risk and should be monitored for your business. But we could also look at chronic. So this is over longer time horizons. And here again, possible metrics. We could look at projected or identified impact on revenues and expenditures. We could look at changes in operating and capital costs. We could look at changes in market behavior. We could look at projected or identified impact on sales and consumer behavior. And we could also look at insurance costs. So very useful information around things, items to monitor that could flag that we now have new or increased physical risk or transition risks. The other thing that's really interesting is they've also included a section on prioritization criteria. And this is, many companies use traditional likelihood and impact approach to work out the severity or the materiality of their risks. Now, to prioritize their risks, companies may use the severity of the risks as determined by the intersections of likelihoods and impacts, and then also evaluate the severity of the risks relative to risk appetite. Given some of the unique characteristics we're dealing with in climate-related risks, companies could consider expanding that assessment to also include vulnerability and speed of onset. So if you look at vulnerability, refers to the susceptibility of a company to a risk event in terms of the company's preparedness, agility, and adaptability. So vulnerability is related to impact and likelihood. So the more vulnerable the company is to risk, the higher the impact is if the event occurs. And if risk controls are not in place and operating as designed, then the likelihood of an event increases. So there is a relationship between vulnerability and the traditional likelihood and impact. Speed of onset is another interesting one. So speed of onset refers to the time that elapses between the occurrence of an event and the point at which the company first feels it affects. So knowing the speed of onset is often useful when developing a risk response plan. So you could now, as illustrated on this slide, you could now have 4 criteria that help you to prioritize your risk. You could look at impact and likelihood, the traditional ones, but you could also now add vulnerability. You could add speed of onset. So if you look there at vulnerability, it could be very low, low, medium, high, very high, or speed of onset, very slow, slow, medium, rapid, immediate. So again, just a slightly different perspective to prioritize various climate-related risks. Now, some of the key takeaways from this publication and from today's webinar. First of all, common understanding. Before we start with this risk assessment process and integrating it within our normal risk management framework, we have to work on a common understanding. So training of our people to understand climate-related risks and opportunities and how it could interact with the business. Interconnections. So we need analysis, collaboration across the business. With sustainability, interconnections, collaboration, these are the key terms that we use on a daily basis. It's not just the sustainability people, just the finance team, just the chief risk officer, everybody working together. Temporal orientation, as we said, we have to consider climate-related risk over short, medium, and long-term time frames for operational and strategic planning, and it could be longer than what you've looked at in the past. Another very important one, proportionality. The integration of climate-related risk into existing frameworks and processes should be proportionate in the context of the company's other risks, the materiality of exposure to these risks, and the implications for the business's strategy should be proportional. And then finally, consistency. And the methodology that we use to integrate climate-related risk should be used consistently within a company's risk management processes to support clarity on analysis of developments and drivers of change over time. I would like to end the webinar, and I think we're just on time, on how BDO can help. Now, as you know, we've got 4 core services at BDO. We can look and we can help you with carbon accounting. We can help you with sustainability reporting, AASB 2, but also voluntary reporting under GRI, World Economic Forum, AASB 1, etc. We can help with sustainability and decarbonization and strategy, conducted by our consulting team, and then also sustainability assurance, which is in the domain of our audit service line. So this is a bit of an overview: advisory services, carbon footprint measurement, sustainability reporting. Please reach out to us. If you are more interested in sustainability strategy, again, reach out and we can assist. Or if you're looking for assurance services, please contact us. We've got a few slides outlining who the best people are to contact for the various services: carbon accounting, sustainability reporting, and strategy. And then also, if you're looking for one of our audit or assurance partners based on your location, please contact these people. I would like to say thank you very much for joining me in this webinar. I am now going to continue a lovely family holiday in Europe. I'll be back in Melbourne for our next sustainability webinar in the last week of July. I hope that you have some time to have a break with your family over the winter school holidays as well.